So we just talked about the group called the monorans, which makes up two of the three domain classifications. Now we're going to talk about protists, which are the first group of the eukaryotes. So if we talk about the six kingdom classification system, groups 1 and 2 are the monorans, and group 3 are the protists. So oftentimes protists are also called protozoans. So the interesting thing about protozoans is that they are also just one cell big, but they have to be able to do all the things that multicellular organisms do, but they have to do them all with one cell. So they have to defend themselves, they have to capture prey, they have to basically reproduce, and they also have to find nutrition and things like that, all with one cell. So you think about how many cells are used in our bodies in order to make all those things happen. Well, a single-celled organism like a protist has to do all those things, but with its one cell, kind of like the monorans. The thing that makes the protists different than the monorans is that, well, they're also made of one cell, but the thing that's different is that they have a nucleus. So you can see the nuclei in these cells right here. You can see the nuclei in these cells here. Some of these ones as well, the dark spots that are within the cells. So the protists, some of them are autotrophic, some of them are heterotrophic, but they have nuclei and they're made of one cell. So there are typically three very popular protists that we tend to study in biology um, because while they are similar in that they're made of one cell and they have a nucleus, they're different in the way that they move. So it's interesting to see how they're able to get their energy and how they use it in order to move around. So on your far left, you have Euglena, and the Euglena use something called a flagellum in order to be able to move around. So if you look at the bottom picture here, this is a drawing of a Euglena, and there's this tail that seems to come out the end of the Euglena. This is called the flagellum, and the flagellum basically it thrashes about and it basically propels the Euglena forward. So you'll notice one thing that's interesting about the Euglena is that it seems to be green in color, whereas the other ones seem to be transparent. Then just for the same reason that plants are green, Euglena are green. So Euglena also, like plants, have chloroplasts in them, which is interesting because they're able to make their own energy. So they're a lot like plants, except for they are unicellular. They're made of one cell. So this one cell has a whole bunch of chloroplasts in it, and it makes its energy by taking the sun's energy and transforming it through photosynthesis. So the Euglena uses its flagellum to propel it forward. This is a paramecium. It's oblong like a Euglena, but it doesn't have the chloroplast in it, and it doesn't have a tail. So paramecium actually have these little hairs that surround their body. And you've heard the term cilia before, but these cilia are a bit different. They organize themselves around the perimeter of the paramecium, and when they start to move or beat, it creates a current of water or fluid around their bodies, and that essentially makes them move around. So the paramecium tend to do a lot of spinning because of the cilia that's around their bodies, and they move through this by using the cilia as opposed to using a tail. So the paramecium, they need to ingest food. They can't make their own food. So these guys are autotrophic, these guys are heterotrophic, while these guys are autotrophic. So on your far right, you see an amoeba. And amoeba is just basically, it looks like it's all cytoplasm on the inside. You can see what's happening here. This is a piece of food, and the amoeba has recognized, probably through chemotaxis, so it's probably sensed it through chemicals, that there's a piece of food out here, and it's engulfing it. So this is a type of endocytosis where the cytoplasm of the amoeba is starting, it almost looks like a hand. It's kind of reaching around both sides of the food, and eventually this gap right here will close, and it will bring the lysosome all the way over to the food, and it'll start to break down the food. So this amoeba uses pseudopods, these little projections of cytoplasm, in order to move around. So the top ones are real life pictures of the organisms, and the bottom ones are drawings which show all the different organelles that are inside of the cell. So they're each one cell big, they each have a nucleus. but they use different ways of moving around. This one uses pseudopods, which are the cytoplasmic extensions. This one uses cilia, which are the little hairs around the surface. This one uses a flagellum, which is a tail. All right, so these guys, the protists, they will use different types of reproduction, and they can use also conjugation and binary fission just like the monorans. So they do have some similarities to the monorans in that they're single cellular, but they also reproduce in the same ways. So even though they have a nucleus, they can still reproduce either through conjugation or binary fission. So the premise is still the same. The asexual method of reproduction is called binary fission, where it essentially just splits into two. So this one paramecium here is just going to split into two, and everything that's inside of the initial paramecium is going to be inside the daughter paramecium. In sexual reproduction, which is called conjugation again, you have two paramecium that come together, and then they exchange their nuclei. So paramecium have two nuclei each. And so what's going to happen here is they're going to exchange their nuclei. So these two belong to this one, these two belong to this one. They switch. And now one paramecium, when they split, one paramecium will have some DNA from itself and from the other one. And this one will have some DNA from itself. And then this is switched from the other one. So sexual reproduction is when you've exchanged DNA between the two involved. So that's what's happened here. So this one's sexual. This one is asexual. So this one is binary fission and conjugation, just like in the monorans. All right, so kingdom fungi, this includes all of the mushrooms essentially, and also includes yeast. So these guys are multicellular. They're saprophytes. We consider them to be saprophytic, and I'll tell you what that means in a minute. They have cell walls, so when you look at their cells, they do look like plant cells in that they're more block-shaped, and they reproduce using spores. So these little gills right here, the gill slits, when it's time to reproduce, they release these little round balls that look like spores, and that's essentially what turns into a new mushroom. So saprophyte, what it means is that, contrary to what most people believe, these mushrooms, they don't just use the sun's energy to make food, cell fuel. They can't just, they don't have chloroplasts, and so they're not autotrophic. They're actually heterotrophic, and most people wonder how they're heterotrophic if they don't have a mouth or teeth or anything to bring food in with. Essentially, what they do is when matter decays around them, they absorb it into their cells. So they're actually using components of nutrition around them. They're not making their own energy. They have to get it from something else. So that's what makes them heterotrophic. Now, heterotrophs that get their food through absorption are called saprophytes. All right, so while some fungi are very useful, others are not useful, or they're considered to be dangerous or lethal. So obviously we do eat some types of mushrooms, so they're useful for eating or for nutrition. Some are useful for symbiosis, and what that means, symbiosis is when two things can help one another out. So if you have a plant, this is the root system of a plant, all these fine little hairs that are very light colored that are coming off of the roots of the plant are actually fungi, and they're called hyphae. And what they do is they actually, say if the fungi is unable to get enough nutrition, the hyphae will actually break down nutrients and provide nutrients to the roots of the plant. And then the same thing happens if there's not a lot of nutrients for the fungi, the plant makes energy and will give some of it to the hyphae. So it's symbiosis in that they help each other out. Fermentation is used in the creation of alcohol. Also yeast in bread. So we do eat bread, so yeast is used for the creation of bread. The fermentation process for making alcohol is useful for making beverages. And then there's also the medicinal use of fungi, where you essentially have, this was the experiment done by Alexander Fleming, where he discovered antibiotics. So again, the smear on the plate is Staphylococcus, and there was some contamination on the plate, which they later found out was a type of fungi or mold, and that became known as penicillin. So it's a medicinal purposes, it has some nutritional purposes, symbiotic purposes, and methods of fermentation. So these are all useful methods of applying fungi, but there's also harmful ones. So harmful ones would be like any type of fungal infection. So athlete's foot is considered a fungal infection. So is ringworm. It's not actually a worm, it's a fungal infection. And then even psilocybin. So these over here, these are what is more commonly known as magic mushrooms. So these are hallucinogens. Psilocybin is the scientific name for the plant. So these are all harmful considerations for fungi. So these are two infections, and this would be an hallucinogen.